here with Allison Fallon, who is an author and a writer, and you do a lot of conferences and you do a lot of speaking, public speaking.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yep.
And how would you identify yourself, just as a writer, period?
Well, what I say about myself is that I write books and I help people write books, and I believe a regular practice of writing can change your life for anybody, even and especially people who don't consider themselves writers.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking about don't consider yourself a writer, you think that writing is a gateway to a subconscious of just being a better human?
Yeah, writing is a spiritual practice. I mean, and I see spiritual, it's a creative practice, it's a spiritual practice, it's a life practice, is the way I see it. So I don't think that there's anyone who can't benefit from a regular practice of writing. In fact, sometimes the people who I find benefit the most from it are people who are the most resistant to trying it. Because, I'll meet people who will say, I'm a terrible writer. A lot of our ideas about what writing means and what it's about and how we are as writers come from, if you start to make the connections, they come from what we were told about ourselves as writers in high school.
Ooh, yeah, good point.
Or middle school or high school. So
your English teacher dictates
right, like our
everything.
early memories of writing. When I ask people, I'll teach writing workshops and I'll say, like, what's your earliest memory of writing, or your most memorable memory? It doesn't have to be your earliest. And you'll hear stories from people that really run parallel to how they see themselves as a writer. So my earliest memory is from fourth grade of a writing. She was just my fourth grade teacher, classroom teacher, who gave us a writing assignment. We were supposed to write a story, and it was supposed to be one page, front and back, handwritten. Back in the day before nobody was doing anything on computers. Yeah. And I wrote 9 pages, front and back, wow, handwritten, and turned it in. And she really praised me for that and loved the story so much and had me read it in front of my classmates. And at the end of that year, she gave me a composition notebook and wrote a little note to me on the inside that just said, "Dear Allison, you're a fantastic writer. Keep writing." Wow. And I filled that entire composition notebook that summer and have been filling composition notebooks really ever since, and then turned to moleskins and all that. Mm-hmm. But, so much of my concept of who I am as a writer came from that experience with her and that early feedback. And you'll hear from writers who are struggling with their identity as a writer. A lot of times you'll hear them tell stories of turning in an essay and getting it back and getting a C. And I really do think, there are some structures to writing that we have to learn. There's grammar that we have to learn. There's all of that. So I'm not discounting that or saying it's not important. But I really do think that writing teachers in middle school and high school do such a disservice to students who it's the same with math, I guess. You learn early on, I'm terrible at math or I'm terrible at writing. And writing the thing about writing is it's just communication. It's not like nobody can be terrible at it.
Yeah, that's true. It's the next layer of it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I'm just thinking about, you're bringing back high school memories of myself and the things, the teachers that were good and the teachers that were bad. And it's interesting because, you were so susceptible to your future is being shaped there. It's like, well, what are you good at? And it's interesting because when you look at certain skills and you look at certain skill sets, whether it be music, whether it be sports, whether it be whatever, there's kind of like a timeline. Like if you don't get in at a certain time, you kind of don't have a chance.
Yeah.
And I think writing is beautiful, and the way that you talk about it and the way that you do it is, you can be 60 years old and you can sit down and you can still write.
Totally.
Find a part of yourself.
And I guess, how do you measure whether or not you're good at writing? There are a lot of different ways you could talk about that. Mm-hmm. So I do believe there are people who are very skilled at writing, who have a skill to write a story that other people are going to engage in and want to read. Mm-hmm. But I guess when I say anybody can benefit from a regular practice of writing, what I mean is it's a fantastic way to get in touch with yourself, to see yourself more clearly, to figure out what you think about a thing, to practice what it even means to think about a thing from 1,000 different angles, to, sometimes you don't know what you think about something until you see what you've written about it on the page. Mm-hmm. And I think most of us don't do this in any other part of our life where we sit still for long enough to process through something that we're thinking or feeling. Yeah, of course. So there is a way to practice writing that you don't have to ever publish anything. It doesn't, the research actually is really fascinating around this. The research shows that people who write regularly are less likely to visit the doctor. They're more likely to get paid more. Mm-hmm. They're more likely to report being happy in their relationships. They're more likely less likely to report dealing with anxiety or depression. It's a great way to curb anxiety and depression. They're mentally healthier, physically healthier, all around healthier. Addicts who are journaling during a process of recovery are more likely to stay in recovery. Cancer patients who journal their way through chemo treatment respond better to treatment. So it's really, and I don't think writing is the only way to get those benefits, but it's the same thing as yoga or prayer, or, it's like pick your creative process, whatever the creative process is. It's a way to slow you down, to get you to center yourself, to self-soothe, to see yourself more clearly. It's just really powerful.
The only issue, I guess, with it, and maybe why more people don't do it, is it takes an actionable step to make that decision.
Sure.
It's not like
Yeah.
you're popping a pill that's going to give you that feeling.
Totally.
It takes the process of, sitting down and actually doing it and finding that time to find that peace and that stillness.
Yeah, it's definitely harder than popping a pill. But the good news is it's easier than...
They will invent a pill that will do it for you at some point. Maybe not in our lifetime.
Yeah, it is easier than... I think writing it's free and it's available. All you need is a pen and a piece of paper. So you can do it anytime, anywhere, without any training. A little bit of guidance and direction, just someone gives you a prompt and you can use it anytime, anywhere for no money. Yeah. So in that sense, I think it's just such a great entry point, for anyone who's wanting to do that kind of self-work.
Well, so when did you decide? So you talked about how writing is, and I actually had this conversation in the last podcast with a producer friend of mine who we were talking about the same thing, like in lyrics. We're talking about just writing stream of consciousness and then going and editing it after. Because obviously in music, you're putting something to something and it will be perceived on the back end of it.
Yeah.
So when did you decide, when you were writing, obviously fourth grade and you continue to develop as a writer, when did you start thinking to yourself, okay, I don't want to say the word, I'm concerned, because I've read in your blogs that this is not the way you look at the world.
Yeah.
You don't worry about what the person's going to perceive you.
Yeah.
But when did you decide, okay, well, maybe what I feel and what I'm going through is actually going to help somebody? Because that's way different than being perceived.
Totally.
Perceived as a negative connotation. So when did you come through to that conclusion? Like, man, not only am I doing this for myself, but this could actually help other people.
Yeah. Well, I think there's that brave first step of deciding this thing I've written that's really personal to me, I'm going to share it with a reader and just see how they respond. And I always say writing is a relationship, right? So it's like no different than being in the world and wanting to make a friend or start a romantic relationship where you're like, I'm going to try to be vulnerable with this other person. And I don't have any control over how they respond to me. They might perceive me as however they want to perceive me. But
so you're investing in this, right?
Yeah,
like
you're
investment. Wow,
you're investing in this relationship with your reader. So the first thing that I started to do was share back when Facebook was brand new, and you could do Facebook notes. And I started. It was before I ever had a blog, and I started just when I would write a piece of prose that I wanted to share, I would share it on Facebook notes, and I would get feedback from mostly my mom and my family members and friends who were paying attention. And it was, for the most part, in those early days too, it was all really positive. It was like, wow, you're such a good writer. This is great. And then I moved forward a year or two, and I started to realize this was something I really wanted to do more regularly. I wanted to be more intentional about it. So I started my first blog. And out of that first blog, fast forward another 12 months, I made the decision that I really wanted to write a book. I didn't have the first clue about how to start writing a book, and I knew nothing about the publishing industry. I knew nothing, but I knew less than I knew. I knew less than I even knew that I knew, if that makes sense. I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. That's where I grew up. I had no experience in the publishing industry, but I was like, I am determined to write this book, and I'm going to figure it out. So as part of that, I knew I needed something to write about. In my life at that time, I was teaching writing in the public school system in Portland. And my life was pretty predictable and routine, and I had kind of done the safe thing for most of my, I was early 20s at that point. And I was like, I'm going to do something worth writing about. I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to sell everything I own. I'm going to move out of my apartment, and I'm going to set off on the open road. I was like, I'm going to drive to all 50 states, which that was the way that I would always say it in the beginning. And now I'm like, you can't drive to all 50 states. I don't know. I mean, I knew that, but... So I drove to all 48 and then flew to Alaska and Hawaii.
The concept is there.
By the time I got done with the 48 too, I was like driving to Alaska. I was like, that's not happening. So anyway, so I took off on this road trip, which took me a year, and
Sounds amazing.
wrote about all my experiences. and stopped in Nashville, funny enough, and stayed here for 2 weeks while I was on the road. That was the longest I stayed in one place. So,
How? I mean, obviously, I haven't read that, and I would like to. What would the overall concept of that be? Like, what were you just telling stories about your experiences of meeting people? Were you talking about your emotions of feeling like you just jumped off this cliff?
Yeah.
And, whether you have a parachute or not. Like, what were you thinking about?
Yeah, for better or worse, I would say my writing style is much more internal. So it's like, this is what it's like to be a human in the world. This is what's going through my mind. This is what I'm trying to figure out. Yeah. So it's a lot of my wrestling with, did I just ruin my life by making this, what felt like such a crazy decision to me?
Yep.
The relationship that I was in at the time with a man I thought I would end up with ended while I was on the road. So that was, at the time that it happened, it felt like, oh, maybe this is a sign that I've taken a wrong turn somehow. And what is the questions I was asking myself were like, what is the balance between taking a risk for your creative dream and creating the life you want, and also not losing the people that you care about?
Musicians know nothing of that.
Nothing of that, yeah.
We're creative people. Yeah.
So I was wrestling with that. So it's a lot of that, but it's definitely stories, fun stories of, things that I did and people I met, and definitely interesting things happened to me. And there are even, the publisher that I worked with is a really conservative publisher out of Chicago. So there are definitely even things that happened on the road that I didn't fully address in the book, because you're like
the outtake book.
Seriously. Yeah.
But did you deal with regret at all? Obviously you just said it. You're like, I'm wondering whether I just gave up on X to do Y. Like, do you feel like that was like a tormenting kind of thing?
It tormented me for a full year after I got home from the road trip. I felt like when I came home, I felt like I've completely destroyed my life. I've got nothing left. I mean, I had sold I had no physical possessions. I was like, I have no bed.
They're overrated.
I have no job.
Well, a bed is good.
Yeah, I know. Like, I'm like sleeping on an air mattress, and it had sort of felt like everyone had moved on with their life, because life moves on, and it wasn't like my friends didn't miss me or but life just moves on. And so and I think musicians, especially musicians who travel a lot and are on the road a lot, you understand that sense of like, I'm away for a time and I come back and suddenly it's like the world that I remembered is not here anymore, and there's this other world here, and it's it's nothing against me, but it is disorienting. And so how do you have a life with any coherency and consistency when you're in and out? And so I struggled with that for, like I said, a full 12 months when I got home. It was I went through a really dark kind of like a fear that I had made a really wrong turn, and felt like all my friends had moved on and I didn't have a job, and I was really struggling to get this book out, and felt like I'm never going to get it on the paper. And even if I do, it's going to be terrible and no one's ever going to read it. It's such a waste of time, which is funny now. I've coached hundreds of authors to get their books on paper, and almost without fail, it's rare that I don't hear those words from an author. This is going to be such a waste of time.
And what a beautiful thing that you've been there, and I mean, that's my biggest issue with like self-help situation, which is seeming to run amok these days. It's all these people that haven't lived through it. Yeah. And everything that I've ever seen from you, it's like you've lived through these things, and you can look somebody in the eye and say, listen, I've been there. This is what it feels like, and here's how I can help. Choose, take it or leave it,
Yeah.
And I mean, that's so early 20s, and that was kind of the spot where you decided that, I mean, do you look at it now? How do you look at it now? I mean,
well, it was
now that you've done 10 books or 11 books,
I mean, it's funny. I look back now and think I was so naive. I had no idea what I was doing. But it was the moment that I chose the career path that I really wanted. And I also think this runs parallel, and this is true for so many creative people I know. I took this risk on what was, for me, a creative dream. It was like, I've always wanted to write a book. I feel really scared to do it. It feels incredibly vulnerable, but I'm going to take the step and do it. But it wasn't really about the book in the end. At the end of the day, I mean, Packing Light is the name of the book. It sold okay. I think has sold around 25,000 copies.
That's great.
So, I mean, it's all right. It didn't do what I thought it was going to do or what I wanted it to do. But again, like that, all of my expectations came with a lot of naivete. So I just had no idea. And there was a lot of stuff in the book that I wouldn't necessarily even stand by anymore. However,
well, you changed so much.
Yeah, I mean, that's just life. Yeah. But here's the thing that it did for me. It gave me a life that was more true to me. So
That
I
risk
think,
gave you that.
yeah, and I think that's true for every creative risk we take. It's like, even if nobody ever read the book, what I get out of it is actually more valuable than having millions of people read the book or making $1 million off of the book or whatever we think we want to happen from our art. So whenever I work with creative people who are struggling with that feeling of like, what is this all going to be worth? And will I regret doing it? I'm like, 10 years out, I don't have any regrets about that choice I made. In fact, I think there's just no way on earth that I wouldn't be in Nashville. I wouldn't have the work that I have that's so meaningful to me and pays me really well. I wouldn't, I wouldn't have had any of the experiences I've had. Everything that I love about my life, I have because I took that step. So even without the book, even minus the book, if you delete that from everything, like if no one ever read it, it's everything that I love about my life came out of that. So that is what has fueled me and compelled me to keep writing, even though, this most recent book that just came out I went through a crazy process of rejection from every angle you can imagine on this book. And I just knew that I needed to write the book. And it sat on my computer for a full year. Wow. I thought nobody's ever going to read this, but it doesn't matter. I needed to write it. And then now it's finally out in the world. And getting the feedback that I'm getting about the book feels, it's just, on the one hand, it's even better because it's just icing on the cake. And on the other hand, it's like, even if you hated it, I don't care. Because I needed to write it.
It's such a peaceful place to be.
It really does feels really grounded. Yeah.
I mean, I think all creatives can kind of relate to that, where they get to a certain place in their career where they have to start letting go of certain situations and letting go of I was talking again with this seems to be kind of a reoccurring thing about you get to a certain place in your life where you're no longer fearful of losing relationships and no longer fearful of being broke because you're good, like you're going to be fine. It's like money is a driving factor of like, I have to maintain relationships to make everybody happy. And you get to a certain place where you're like, well, I'm doing this. And I read this in your blog about creativity, where you were talking about how if you allow yourself to do it for yourself and not for somebody else, then you're obviously getting much more out of it. But getting to that place, it's not like you can just magically wake up one day and go, I'm there, And my curiosity for you is obviously you just said this with the latest book, but I mean, has it taken this long for you to get to that place where you're not worried about the other side?
Yes, it has, for sure. And there's still days when I for sure worry about it. I mean,
I think we're all human.
Like the month leading up to my book release this time around, this book that I just released called Indestructible is for sure the most vulnerable story I've ever told. It's very, very personal. And the month leading up to the book release, I was like, I am losing my mind. I'm like, and even though you can...
Because you were so scared about sharing something so
Yeah,
personal.
I mean, I was just like, it's the feeling of the comparison that I make is when you're working out, you're lifting weights or doing yoga or whatever, and your muscles are just literally like shaking so bad that it's like your body's way of going like, stop this, get me out of here, I do not want to be doing this. But it's also the process of change and transformation, and that's what that whole month felt like to me. Like, where's the eject button? I want out, I don't want to do this. But then knowing the whole time you actually really do want to do it, and remembering from when you've done it before how deeply rewarding it is, and how how great it is to have people connect with the story and have an impact for them. So that's the thing that keeps you going. But yeah, I mean, like on a physical level, my body was just like, I reject this experience. I do not want to be a part of this anymore. So that resistance is real. I think
I love it. It's at least a transformation.
Yes.
Because if you put yourself out there like that, and then you get a certain element of it where they're looking at you and they're like, wow, thank you for sharing your story. This means something to me. But not only that, is I know you better and I connect with you better.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, well, it's okay for me to do that?
Yeah.
I'm allowed to?
Yeah.
I'm allowed to be myself?
Yeah, I know. Who knew?
I mean, I think that this is something that that I've been dealing with for like the last couple of years of as a creative person, you're just always performing. I mean, you can be up on stage, you can be speaking, you can be whatever. And the performance, I always equate it to, you know, I walk into, in what I do for a living, I walk into a studio and I can't be a sad person. I have to be a happy person.
Yeah.
Because I'm bringing something beautiful, trying to bring something beautiful to somebody's dream. And they don't want that in there because then they're not going to call me again. So where do you find your outlet to be the person that you are and you're no longer performing for people, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that is a major, that personally, that's a transformation that I've shared with you recently that I've gone through, where there are certain things and certain people in your life that you're always performing for. And I want to lift a quote that I want to tell you about because I saved it on my pins that you wrote. And I wanted to bring it up. I love your little quotes that you pop up with every once in a while. And I literally only have like 4 pins on here in years.
I feel so honored.
It said, "You are allowed to outgrow people, places, situations. It is not mean to move on." And yeah, I definitely go back to that a lot because people can take away your drive to create, or people can take away your drive to be happy, even though you don't realize that it's happening because you're perceiving you in a negative light.
Yep.
And then it's like it shuts you down.
Yep.
You know, and I think it's okay to admit that. I think that's been the peaceful thing. And it's interesting to me how personal you are. I mean, I don't think I could be as personal as you are. Like, I feel like there's still an element of but that's just in the musical world. You choose, talking about songwriting, you can choose how little you want to be about something. And also in writing, I mean, you can tell a story in metaphors, and it can be about your life or whatever. Yeah. And I find it interesting and fascinating that you're able to, obviously it was with great resistance, that you were able to put that out there and be this beacon of light for people that are going through that similar kind of issue.
Yeah.
You know, how do you feel, and I'm going to talk about how you're being perceived, but how are you being accepted when you go to these places and you're speaking to these people in a place of trying to help them, not in a place of trying to help them write, but in a place of, this is my story and I want you to hear my story so that you can feel safe to get out of whatever situation you're in.
Yeah.
How do you feel? What is the emotion that do you feel good? Do you feel worn out about it? Do you feel like, how do you feel when people come up to you and are bringing that to you to light, that you've changed their world? I mean, what is that? How does that feel?
Well, it's incredibly energizing.
Energizing, okay.
It does, it gives meaning to what I went through, you know, and here's the thing that I have to remember about, I mean, I think the same would be true for a musician writing a song. It's like you go through this terrible thing, that the only way you could have gotten the song is that you have to walk through this heartbreak that's happened. Then you write a song about it, then you share the song with people, and people listen to the song and they go, this song is bringing me so much life and love and hope. And then you're like, oh my gosh, well, if I had to walk through that in order to get that song so that you could feel a little bit less, it activates our natural compassion system. I just think it's like, man, that just gives tons of meaning to what I went through. So when the thing I have to remember about this book, so the book is about getting out of an abusive relationship, which really, what I have been fascinated by is how many people have had a similar experience, even if it's not the same on the surface, an experience of being oppressed or silenced or held back in some way by some person in their life. Yeah. So when you are speaking to people who are still stuck in it in some way or another, who haven't found their way to freedom yet, they really have a hard time, even if it's touching a nerve, they have a hard time speaking it. So what's been cool is to see how my words are giving them words to say something they've wanted to say but haven't been able to say. And that's the feedback that I keep hearing so often, is it's almost like you're waking them up, like turning the lights on in the house. Because I mean, I remember, I'll see old pictures of myself from when I was in this relationship, and it's like, oh my gosh, like I just look like a different person, like someone turned off all the lights in the house, is the analogy that has made sense to me. And then when you see photos of me now, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like someone turned the lights on. So, and the difference is, even if you didn't know me at that time, you know, I'll show friends now, I'm like, look at the difference in these two pictures, and it's just stark. So now when I see women especially, but it's not just women, who are trapped in some way or another, I recognize that look on their face, like, you're not even you don't even know how trapped you are. And so to watch them read the book and watch the lights come on in the house is really, a lot of times the first emotion that they experience is grief and pain and fear, because now they're aware and they have to do something about
You
it.
have to deal with it. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's definitely a process. It's not like the book that I have written, and I always say, books ask us to write them more than it's not like you think up an idea. It's like a book
We've been
comes.
talking about the big magic a lot.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But how they come, yeah, for sure.
So, when this book that I've written, that I had to write, is not, like 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. It's not like, let me give you an easy step-by-step process to being happier.
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
There's a few of those out there.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and they're great. They
There are
are
some good ones,
good
yes.
for what they are.
Yeah.
But this book is more like a real story of what it looks like for a person who has been oppressed to show up in their life with their whole heart, face the pain and the fear, and fight your way through it. I mean,
Like a foggy mirror in every page, they're wiping it away, and then they're like, oh crap, that's me.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I love that you said it's energizing. How does that translate into your world? Like, where does that energy go to?
Oh.
Wanting to do more, wanting to tell more story, like
Yeah.
want to be even more transparent about.
I mean,
your
I
life?
think it keeps me going for sure.
Mhm.
Because I'll say there's 2 parts to what I do. Like I said at the beginning, I write books and I help people write books.
Mhm.
And I think a regular practice of writing can change your life. So I am helping writers, and I'm also writing my own books. The writing my own books part right now, and I'm sure that there are a lot of creative people listening who can identify with this, is not paying my bills. Because, when you have a product that's $20, whether it's a CD or a book, you have to sell a shit ton of books to make
Everybody's got
a
their
living.
piece of the pie. Yeah.
So that's not the thing that's paying my bills. The thing that's paying my bills is helping writers. But, I mean, seeing the impact that this book has had on people motivates me to help writers who might not otherwise get a shot. A lot of times sometimes I'm working with writers who are already New York Times bestsellers and they just need some help getting their outline on the paper, and that's great too. But sometimes I'm working with writers who I think, the kind of resistance you're facing, you need I think of myself like a doula. Like you need someone to catch the baby. It's like someone to be like, you can do this, keep breathing. So I think without my help, their book probably would never make it into the world. And even if, I helped an author who had stage 4 cancer and was writing the book as a legacy piece for her 4 children. And I thought, even if her 4 kids are the only people who ever read this book, it is really important that this book exists in the world. So that gives meaning to that part of the work that I do too. And it also keeps me doing the book writing, even though the book writing, it doesn't pay me back in dollars. It pays me back in something totally different.
Well, I think today in today's society, we're not identified as one thing.
Right.
Branding is definitely a part of, you are Allison Fallon. This is your brand, and your book is totally leading to all those other opportunities.
Totally.
And it's interesting, just stepping away from the emotional side of it and looking at the business side of it and how that all works too. It's fascinating watching you build your brand and the way that you share it. And how it all leads to, to obviously to pay the bills. I mean, it's like doing this podcast. It doesn't pay anything, and it takes hours, several hours to do, or any little thing that you want to do that you share for yourself. But it's a part of the process.
Yep.
I think it's a part of eventually leading to exactly what you want to do, or leading to something that matters. And I've always been a firm believer in that, and I think a lot of creative types can get pigeonholed into certain. Just to be selfish and tell a story quickly, but I remember when I was a kid, I would go for dinner with my family, and I would bring manuscript paper, and I would transcribe stuff and I'd work on things, because I was always thinking about, well, what's next? How can I better myself in this situation to do something that's going to excel, push me further somewhere else?
Yeah.
And at that point, it was a competitive thing. It's like, I want to be the best that I can be. And then it turns, as you get older, it turns into, well, now this is my heart and soul that I want to put that kind of effort into. So, and doing this podcast for me, it's exactly what that is. It's we're sitting here having a beautiful discussion about something that matters to both of us and hopefully matters to other people, and you do it for free.
Yeah.
You just sit there and talk. But it also is, for me, it's almost like my version of your book, not to the degree that you're, sharing what you share. I mean, I definitely have limits about what I would like to share, but I know that I've been performing my entire life, and people that think they know me don't know me, and then they listen to this thing and they're like, holy crap, like, I mean, I'm open. I'm going to therapy. I'm seeing a therapist. I love it. I get depressed. Like people are like, wait a minute, I've never seen you unhappy. I thought, but that happens, and people need to accept that and talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think that I think as long as you're the branding thing that I've always been attracted to on social media, and social media can go in a lot of different directions, but one of the reasons that I love watching you building your brand is it's genuine. And I don't think people need to open up their chest and to show their heart to be genuine. They just need to be genuine in an aspect of, this is what I'm willing to offer and this is what I'm willing to share. And I think more, if that happens, and that's what you're doing, you're investing in that. You're investing in being the best version of you and how you are portrayed, or how you want to be portrayed. Because you can come on here and be an asshole, and if that's how you want to be portrayed, then that's fine. And some works for some people. I mean, I've seen comedians, and it's like that's their bag.
Totally. I just watched the David Letterman interview with Howard Stern. Have you seen that? Yeah, it's good. It's worth watching. I know, such a perfect example. But he talks about that on the interview. He's really honest, and he's in therapy now too. Apparently, is what he says. Nice. To Dave, but he talks about playing the role of the asshole. Yeah. It was the thing that would get ratings.
Yeah. But did it feel natural to him?
He said, he talks about it in a way, it's almost like an actor. He talks about it like, he said, because Dave brought up how apparently, I don't remember this, but Howard Stern had said some really hateful things about Dave and his relationship and other things. I'm sure there's
a long list.
And so, Howard's saying like, when I was saying those words, I didn't think this is going to hurt somebody. Wow. I just thought this is going to get me ratings.
Yeah. That's not a way to chase life.
No. I mean, and he says that. But it's just, I guess, to exemplify the point you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can't do that anymore in today's society. Like, I feel like the future of branding is being genuine, because people have access. Like, if you went to one of these things and stood up in front of the class and treated everybody with disrespect and was rude, like, you're not doing one of those again.
Yeah, totally.
Because they have access to you. It's like I remember like some of my favorite I met my favorite saxophone player when I was like 16. And like he was like, I drove all the way down to Seattle I'm a Northwestern as well. So Vancouver to Seattle, like my dad and I drove like 3 hours there, like late in the, to see the show. Yeah. Came home and I said, hey man, I'd love a lesson. And he's like, okay, come tomorrow. So then we drive home, wake up at 5 a.m., go to school, do all that. And I drive all the way back to Seattle. He's not there at the hotel. And they ring his room. He's not there. And I'm sitting there with my dad as this sheltered 17-year-old kid, and these doors open to the elevator, and he's with a girl, and they walk right past me, and he doesn't even remember who I am. And I was like, man, I don't ever want to meet my heroes ever again. Yeah. But nowadays that can't happen. Right. It can't be that way. And I think the future of social media, because everybody just gets sick of this fakeness, is the genuine people will rise to the top. The people that are just doing it for the right reasons. So
yeah, I hope that's true, because especially with social media, and this maybe is a whole other conversation, but I sometimes watch people who are growing their following really fast, and I'm like, yeah, I could do that too. It's like the things that you could do that would get you more followers, and I just have felt for the most part unwilling to do the gimmicks. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, they say that I talk about this on the podcast a lot, but the idea of 1,000 true fans. Oh, it's like the concept of that's all you really need, and you can maintain a life, and whatever, because you're engaged with these 1,000 people that are sitting there watching and waiting for your art. Yes. And that's all. I mean, what would you would you rather have 1 million followers or 200,000 that are looking at you and actually care about what you're engaging with you? And you can see that too. I mean, you go and you look at the likes, and there's got like 20,000 followers and there's 100 likes. You're
like, people aren't paying attention.
And that's not a situation where you're looking at it judging yourself. For me, it's curiosity. Like I get so curious about the branding aspect and watching different people and how they do it and how they bring different things to light. and you do it well, and and a lot of the stuff that you do doesn't, like that little picture that you did. I mean, you had to sit there on your computer, come up with those words, design those words, export that JPEG, and then upload it. I mean, it might have taken you 45 minutes, 45 minutes, but you're not getting paid for that.
No.
You're just sharing a part of yourself, and it all leads to you, and it all leads to you being you. And I think musicians can get so stressed out about, oh, I need to do this, I need to brand myself as this. It's like, find what you're going to focus on and just jump in and act on it and get out of the other places that aren't satisfying that part of what you are.
Well, and I think the other thing too is that trying to figure out what my brand is going to be can be a distraction from just doing the creative work.
Just being you, yeah.
So sometimes it takes doing the creative work for a long time in order to clarify the vision of what it is that who you're going to be as a creative. So to the point where, for most of us, the first few things that we create, 10 years later, we look back and go, yeah, I don't know that I would create that again. You said earlier about that first book. Like, I don't know if I feel that way anymore. Obviously, we're very different. I mean, we all the way that I look at creative is like, they're snapshots of where you were at that time. And how beautiful. And this is where I've lost years of my life by not releasing music, and it just sits in a vault, you know. Yeah.
How beautiful it is it now, and will it be later on in your life when you can look back at that book and go, man, I remember that trip, I remember that story, I remember that. I think you've captured it. Yeah. You've captured that moment. And I think we can get a little self-destructive if it's like, oh man, I would have changed that chord back then. I hate that. I hate my voice, the way it sounds, or that lyric. Like, what kind of asshole was I to write that lyric? But it's like, but I was an asshole at that moment to write that lyric. So like, own it. You know what I'm saying? True. So I think I agree with you. Like, if you want to find your path, and you experiment with different things and stuff like that. But yeah, I loved it when you said that. I wouldn't do that anymore, but you did it then. Yeah. And that's the beautiful part. And the shame in it is that your stinking publisher decided that they were going to not let you say some of the good stuff. I know. You know. It
is a shame. And that's one of the things that bums me out about the book. Yeah. The other thing, too, reading back on it, because I was married at the time that I wrote it, I hear his voice in it so much more than my voice.
Oh, wow.
So that's hard to read back through and just realize how much I was performing to try to impress him. Not even to impress him. It was like to fit the person who he needed me to be in order for our life to work. And so now I look back and just think, I wish I would have just... Well, this is the beauty of writing, though, is that writing, it forces you to face yourself on the page. You won't... When you're writing the words down on the page, you get this sense of like, no, that's not what I think, or that's not... Or you see yourself really clearly and you go like just like you said, you're like, that lyric, only an asshole would write that lyric. Yeah. You know, like, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that is, I'm looking at myself in a mirror.
Yeah.
So that's what really... that reading Packing Light again forces me to face the woman who made the decision to marry a man I did not want to marry, to stay in a marriage that was really abusive and controlling for as long as I did. And I think the process for me now, and the process of writing this most recent book, was learning to have tons of compassion for myself and why I would have made those choices that I made. And that's important too, but it's interesting. It is hard to read it back.
I can imagine, and having his voice in your writing is interesting because we as creatives are just always trying to access emotions and when you have friendships, or you're in a relationship, or you're married, or whatever it is, I mean, the best way to probably to be in that relationship is for everything to just be kind of chill and just be kind of level, and you're working together to. I'm still learning about that, but working together to make everybody's happy, and you're not trying to make them happy, or they're not trying to make you happy, and it's difficult as creatives because we get paid to go into a space, be it a desk, be it a office, be it a studio, and it's like, okay, access your emotions. Access and when you're in a marriage, or when you're in a long-term relationship, like, you've pretty much leveled off. Like, there's no honeymoon phase. You're not following. I mean, you've kind of gotten into this pace of this relationship. And I've had so many friends that would always say to me, "It's like, man, I'm 3 years into this relationship, and everything's great. I got nothing to write about because there's no bad things happening to me." So then what you do is, and I don't know if you're this way, but I think that it's kind of common, is you could go back to your writings that you were in other situations, or good situations or bad situations, and then you access those points. But the point is you're always accessing like a really deep emotion, and then you're coming back into this relationship with somebody, and you have to be at peace with this person. And it's so interesting to always, it's like, like, and that person who it may was a creative or not is not going down into that well. Like, you're going deep into this well of who you are and what you're trying to be to better yourself. And a lot of people just, it takes an actionable step to do that, so they choose not to do that.
Yeah.
And then you're now digging and becoming this flower that's growing about what you really want to do, when in this relationship, this person is just kind of cool with the status quo,
Yeah, I would say that makes me think that our job really as creative people, and I think we miss this a lot when we're doing our creative work, a great writer provokes a reader. It goes against our nature. It actually goes against our biological nature to provoke, because
what are we provoking? An emotion from somebody, or just a
feeling?
Yeah,
okay. A feeling, an emotion, to provoke them to think about something different. So I always say, when you sit down to write, you need to know, what do you want your reader to think, know, feel, or do differently after they read what you've written that they couldn't do before. Your job is to move them from one place to another. If you haven't moved someone, you'll lose them. I mean, this is why we read the first 25 pages of a book and then never go back to it, because we recognize there's no transformation happening for us. The only way that we'll stay engaged with the book, and the number one piece of feedback I get about my book is I read it in a single sitting. I couldn't put it down. The reason for that is not because I'm such an amazing writer, but it's because I've learned what makes great writing, which is narrative structure. And a narrative structure is all about moving your reader from one place to another. So the problem with this is it goes against our very nature, because we don't like to provoke people. To your point, when you get in a relationship, what you're seeking is equilibrium. You're seeking, like, I'm going to try to kind of keep you happy, and you're going to try to kind of keep me happy. We're not really going to provoke each other. We're seeking equilibrium. This is part of our survival mechanism. So that's what we are wired to do. And actually, the best relationships, I think, are ones where I'm given permission to have an authentic experience of what it's like to be human in the world. By that I mean my partner in the relationship knows how to hold the space for me to have an experience of myself, which is incredibly provoking, right? At the end of the day,
that's all we want.
Learning to hold the space for someone who has been provoked provokes us, and it's like this push-pull. That to me is a relationship that's actually dynamic. And especially in romantic relationships, it's what keeps the passion and chemistry alive in a relationship over time. So that the push-pull has to exist there. And when we think of our creative work and our writing, it's actually, that's what our job is. It's to do the same thing. We have to, in order to do that, we have to get over the feeling, okay, in order to do that in our romantic relationships or in our writing, we have to get over that sensibility that we have, that if I provoke someone, they're going to leave. Or if I provoke someone, they're not going to like me. Or if I provoke someone, they're going to have an opinion about me. Of course they're going to have an opinion about you. And their opinion about you actually has far more to do with their experience of being human in the world than it does with who you are. It's so vital and important. My book, I have people who are close to me in my life who are like, couldn't do it, couldn't read the book.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I'm like, I get it, because it's incredibly provoking. To have someone tell you honestly, to be so brutally honest, is incredibly provoking. I mean, and to the point where I think, we have to take baby steps in that direction, and we're all getting there. It's not like a light switch you can turn on and all of a sudden learn how to be really vulnerable and honest in a relationship. And I think even if you could skip all the steps and get to that point, it would not be, I don't know that it would be beneficial, because I think part of it is the process of unfolding. But like, I have friends who talk about they're in a romantic relationship, and they have this, it's like a concern they have about the relationship that they're keeping from their partner, because they're like, this would really upset them. A friend is like, it really bothers me that he doesn't have more drive to make more money or contribute something bigger to the world. Or a guy friend says to me, like, it really bothers me that my girlfriend's not more active and concerned about her body. And those kinds of conversations, I can imagine that even people listening are like, people have very strong opinions about those kinds of conversations, and there's a lot of ways that we could talk about those two things. But my point being, the practice is, how honest can I be about myself, not about the other person, but about me? What anxieties does this bring up in me, that this person I'm in a relationship with is acting this way or whatever. What is my experience of that like? And the more that we can start to do that, the more intimacy and vulnerability we cultivate. And that's really what good writing is doing, I think, is let me say one more thing. When I sat down to write this latest book, I was really, the phrase that kept going through my mind is, I'm finally going to tell the truth, because I had been keeping secrets for so long. Mm-hmm. And I sat down to tell the truth, and my first draft of the book was really, it was very truthful. But it was all about him. When I read it back, I was like, this is a book about him. And I don't want to write a book about him. I want to write a book about me. And when I sat down to write the second draft, that was the challenge, was, can I tell the truth about me? Like, what is it that motivates a woman to walk down the aisle and say yes to a man she doesn't want to marry? Yeah. That's actually a much more interesting question to answer than trying to answer questions of, like, what was motivating him, because I don't have the answers to any of those questions.
Yeah, of course.
Like, I have no idea what was motivating his behavior.
And you've probably spent years after it trying to find those answers and realized I'm just coming up against the wall.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, and I think that is the thing that has captivated people by my story, is that I'm answering a question that's actually really interesting, which is like, what does motivate a person to do something they don't want to do, to marry someone they don't want to marry, to stay in a place they don't want to be, to, it's an interesting story question. It opens a story loop in our brains. And I think it's something we can all resonate with too.
Yeah, well, I think writing, as you've said earlier, and I just want to, I think this is how you look at it. This is a way that I would look at it. I don't know if you share the view, but I mean, it is a version of your subconscious. Like, it's a tangible version of your subconscious. And it's interesting, as a creative person such as yourself, I mean, that's a scary place, because there's that little thing called the ego that sits between that. And getting rid of that ego, it's been a theme on this podcast for sure. It's finding, I mean, whether you do it with drugs or not. I always tell the story. There's Michael Pollan just wrote this book about psychoactive drugs, and I've never done them, but it fascinates me because of some of the stuff that's actually helping with, like, PTSD, and there's these amazing trials that are happening. And he's a 60-year-old writer for the New Yorker that decided to do this, and he's like, I've never done them. Let's see what happens. And he did all the ayahuasca, all the different ones, and he did mushrooms. And when he did that, he actually separated himself. He was a guided one, so he had a therapist with him, and he actually separated from his ego and could look at it as a tangible thing. Wow. He said all the other trips were fine or whatever, but he said this one actually changed the way that I looked at myself. And he separated from his ego to the point where for months and months he's been decompressing that, and it actually has allowed him to grow to a place where when he feels his ego coming up to stop his subconscious from coming to the light, he can actually say, I'm okay without you, ego, I don't need you, go away.
Wow.
And it's changed the way that he looks at things. And I think that's in the therapy situation, they know a lot more about the brain and about all the places that it goes through a process of, the first process is, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Are you cold? Are you safe? Then it goes to the next process.
Yep.
And eventually the last place that it gets to is the place that we're trying to access when we're writing,
Yep.
And it was really interesting to hear that his ego, what was stopping that. And I think that as creative people, we need to look into that more for sure. But the older we get, the more we can suppress the ego and be like, I don't need you, I'm good, I'm not thinking about how I'm being, because how you're being perceived is a big thing, obviously, and you deal with that in your thing. When you talk about getting past that in your classes and with these people that obviously you're their cheerleader, you're going, we're going to do this, you're good, I've been there, I know, this is cool. What other elements are you bringing to the table? From what I read, a couple things, and maybe you can expound upon it, but just getting them out uncomfortable, like stand up and dance around, like just do crazy things that you not normally would do. Like, what are some of the elements that help them tap into the subconscious and block the ego out?
Well, here's the really tragic part, is that the fastest way to get to our egos is get past our egos and get to our subconscious is to have something tragic happen.
Yes.
So, I mean, that will shatter your ego in a heartbeat. Someone in your family gets sick, or you get sick, or you lose someone you love, or you go bankrupt, or you lose your business, or you whatever. Or you have some some level of fame and some PR disaster. That will get you past your ego really fast.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't wish that kind of tragedy on anyone, But
No,
it is
you're
really
absolutely-
the
yeah, for
one,
sure.
it's the one bright thing that comes out of tragedy is you're like, oh, it feels
I
so
love
good
that.
not to be living in my ego anymore. So that's the number one way. But beyond that, I mean, what the research shows is a very quick way to get out of your prefrontal cortex, out of your, I don't know if you would call that your ego, but it's definitely your executive brain, the part of our brain that we're living in most of our day. So 90% of our day in the modern world, we're living in our executive brain. And we need that part of our brain because it helps us get to meetings on time and pay our bills and all that stuff. But to get past it and to our subconscious, body movement is one of the fastest ways to get out of that prefrontal cortex and into our subconscious, into our limbic system. So yoga, the research is showing yoga is really powerful for that. Running, it's why when you go for a run, people talk about that the breaking point, the runner's high, when you're, I mean, I don't know if it's your brain getting deprived of enough oxygen or what's happening, but that tipping point is the point where your prefrontal cortex disengages and it stops telling you the story, I'm too tired, I can't do this anymore. And runners have had this experience where you it's almost like you dip into this place where you're like, I am a superhuman, I had no idea that I could run this far. So that is one way to improv, when you're having to make spontaneous movements on the fly, and helps you to get out of your prefrontal cortex. Another great way is essential oils. There's something about our sense of smell. Your olfactory system is your system that's most strongly tied to memory, and your limbic system is where all of your old memories are held.
Okay.
So you can use a sense of smell like an essential oil or something else, Palo Santo or incense. You can use that to activate your limbic system, and especially if you tie that scent to your creative practice. So if every time you do a creative practice you're using the same scent, it can help you get back to that place of creativity. So that's another thing I do. Music is another great one. There's a great book called This Is Your Brain on Music.
Yeah, I have it. I have not read it, but yes, I need to read it. Yeah.
So it's fascinating how I tweeted this out a couple of weeks ago and was really I was surprised, I guess, by the response, because I didn't know how many other people had this experience. But sometimes for me, when I'm working on a piece of writing, whether it's a book or a chapter or whatever, I have to listen to the exact same song on repeat for like 150 times that day. It's almost like it gets my brain to the place where it needs to be, and then if I turn the music off or if I turn on a different song, then I can't get the writing done. So I tweeted something about that, and then I had dozens of people respond to me and say they've had a similar kind of experience. So anyway, I have no tangible research on that, but it's just interesting.
Sounds pretty good to me. You got the affirmation.
And then the other thing too that I tell writers is, so writing first thing in the morning, because our limbic systems are very activated while we're sleeping. It's the part of our brain that dreams. So first thing in the morning, before you pick up your cell phone, before you check your email, before you check any social media, any of that stuff, if you can leverage those first few hours of the morning for your creative work, you are much more likely to be able to disengage your prefrontal cortex and stay in your limbic system. Later in the day, it gets harder because once your prefrontal cortex is engaged, once you've gotten into your email account and you know these 15 different people need something from me, and I've got all these expectations I've got to fulfill, and I've got to be this place at this time, and I got to leave here by this time to get there by that time, that's all your executive brain. And so it's hard once that part of your brain is engaged to disengage it.
Yeah, I can imagine that's why people have trouble sleeping too.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that. But that place, if you do fall asleep, I don't know if you are a come up with ideas when you're sleeping kind of person, but that right before you fall, when it disengages, and I've woken up from that spot several times with something. It's like just to be. I mean, they say there's a term for that state. I don't know what it is, and some people have a disease where they exist in that state. Because I was doing some research, I wanted to talk about that state today with this, and I couldn't find the term, but they say that you can. Have you ever done floating? Have you ever checked that out?
I have heard so much about it and definitely want to do it, and I just haven't like made the time for it or space for it, I guess. But
yeah,
I hear it's great.
Yeah, it's there's one in Nashville that just opened up, and I went and I stopped in, and I was talking to the guy about it just out of curiosity, and he was saying the goal of floating is to be in that state And
Wow.
he told me what it was, and I think it starts with an M, but I forget. But being in that state, wow, like, it's like anything. I mean, with meditation, when you sit down to meditate for the first time, everything is like telling you don't do that.
Totally.
But
Yeah.
that's a part of the process.
Totally.
You have to practice it, And he said the same thing about floating. He said if you do the floating, it'll get you into that place. And some of the people that I know that have done it, they say it happens every once in a while. Like it's like yoga is an example of that. I think
it.
where, and it starts with an SH where you get to the supreme. When you have that moment in yoga where you just have like an epiphany, what's that called? I think it starts with an S.
I don't know.
I'm gonna have to look that
It's a
up.
Shavasana. I mean, Shavasana is like the rest at the end.
It's the Shavasana, and then maybe that's what it is. But it's that moment where you like everything becomes clear, and I've never experienced that in yoga because I haven't practiced it enough. But yeah, that thing where everything just kind of makes sense. And I'm curious. I love this scent idea. That's really amazing. My first question here's the problem though. My first question when I was going to interrupt you was say, well, which oils do what?
Yeah.
Because that's the hardest thing to do is to just sit down and do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But little tricks of like if that scent reminds you and triggers you and gets your body to want to get to that place.
Totally.
And I think so many of us fail in that aspect of it. It's like, oh, I'll get to it tomorrow or I'll do whatever.
And also I'll say this, the question which oils is that's a prefrontal cortex question.
There you go. Yeah.
So the answer
right
to the
in there.
question, the limbic system answer to the question is smell a bunch of them, and whichever one does it for you is the one.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? It's almost like it's answering a question without words. That when you can answer a question without words or with words that make no sense, that's your limbic system. Our limbic systems think in images. So actually, I think if you're a poet or a musician, you're living in your limbic system probably a lot more than the average person. Because if you think about the way that a poem or a song works, you have such a limited space to make a statement or tell a story that you almost have to make these connections between images that are seemingly disconnected, and you have to make it make sense for the person who's listening. And sometimes, if you think of like how we dream, dreams jump from like, it's like you're in Oregon and then you're in Nashville, and how did you get there in 5 minutes? But you just drove. Do you know what I mean? Because your brain is doing things that don't make sense, but they sort of do make sense. When you're having experiences like that or thoughts like that, that's when you know that you're in your limbic system. It doesn't always make total sense, which is the dilemma for creative people. Is your prefrontal cortex will argue with your limbic system. Best example, if you walk into a building and you see someone that you don't want to see, let's say you see an ex-husband, for example, and you see this person and your limbic system tells you fight, flight, freeze. So your limbic system is like all systems firing, get the hell out, or go kick his ass, or whatever. That's your limbic system talking. Your prefrontal cortex tells you, take a deep breath, you're fine, this is not a big deal, calm down, don't make this awkward, don't do anything crazy, don't make yourself look crazy. Like that's your limbic system talking to you. So your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system, that's your prefrontal cortex talking to you. So the two systems will fight with each other. They have differing perspectives on the same thing. And your prefrontal cortex, because it's protecting you, doesn't want to disengage because it's afraid your limbic system's going to run away with, like that it's going to run away with you. Like your limbic system will lose track of time. It's like, I always make the joke about musicians always being late everywhere they go because they're living in their limbic system all the time. So I think that's important to note that like when you're sitting down to the page and you're trying to write something and you write something and you're like, oh, that's stupid, delete, delete, delete. And then you're like, try again. And you're like, that's not how I want to say that, delete, delete, delete. That is your limbic system trying to do something and your prefrontal cortex editing you while you go. So sometimes just knowing that it's helpful to watch it at work because you're like, oh, I really am living in my executive brain most of the time and it's keeping me stuck.
Yeah, the therapist that I'm seeing, one of the recent ones was you would talk about a certain thing and then you'd have a feeling come over your body, and she would be like, I want you to be aware of that feeling. Like, how do you feel right now? And it's like, well, my heart is racing. It's like, okay, well, be aware that your heart is racing, and start to understand that you can now tap into like you're saying. It's like, well, I know that I'm being managed by something in my brain that I can disengage from. And it's the start of the process, but I see where you're coming from. That feeling of that feeling in your body that's going to affect your process.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have we talked about this. I've talked about this with Dustin, who's a songwriter, beautiful songwriter, and we talked about how when you are writing and you are getting that big magic inspiration, so to speak, like it's come to you. Do you teach doing a stream of conscious kind of writing and then allowing to edit at the end,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing? So when you did your book, I mean, was it just kind of when you sit down to write something, which you do on a regular basis, is it focused to a point, or is it today I'm writing about this and I'm just going to write and I'm going to step away and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to edit? Like, what's that process look like from beginning to end for you?
There's two different kinds of writing. So
Okay.
there's what Julia Cameron would call morning pages that I fully recommend, but they're like, I write for 3 pages and I never look at it
You
again.
said morning pages? Oh, cool.
Julia Cameron has a
Love that.
book called The Artist Way.
Okay.
That's actually great for any creative person, so even musicians. It doesn't discriminate. It's a great way to stir up your own internal creativity and to use writing as a practice of connection to the self.
Mhm.
So however you want to say that. But her practice, morning pages say that you spend the first 40 minutes of your morning, first thing when you wake up, writing 3 pages of stream of consciousness writing that you throw away and never look at it again.
Hmm.
So the point is not to create something that's publishable. The point is to stir up that inner sense of creativity. So
Yes.
that's one kind of writing.
Okay.
Another kind of writing would be writing to publish. And in that sense, I still recommend getting into the flow. I can never say that guy's last name who wrote the book Flow, but it's a great book. It's like, just good. I actually have it with me. I can show it to you.
I love that morning pages idea.
Yeah, his last name is impossible to say. It's got like
I'm not
7
going to try.
consonants in a row.
Even his first name, I'm not even going to go after.
Yeah. Anyway, but it's so getting into the process of flow, which does require disengaging the prefrontal cortex. But I always recommend that writers do this within a context, within some boundaries. So, like for example, writers, what do you call them? When you like write with somebody, write a song with somebody. Writers. Is it called a writer's round? Or no? What's it called?
Just sitting in a room with somebody
Yeah.
and write just a writing session.
Okay, writing session. It's the same sort of thing. Like you
Mhm.
schedule 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of know we're going to work on a song that's maybe sort of going to be like this.
I see what you're saying.
And then
Yeah.
within that boundary,
Context.
you just let yourself do whatever you need to do to get there. So, and you might not ever get to where you thought you were going to go. In fact, you might come up with a song that's so different than what you thought you were going to write. But having that context of here's my writing time, this is what we're going to try to do, and we're just going to let our brains wander and see if we can get there.
I talk about that a lot with musicians on this thing, where you put yourself, that sounds like you're putting yourself in a box. Now that box is whatever that box is, but that is such an important thing to think about, because so many creative people in my world are always in the box,
Mhm.
and they don't allow themselves to access that. Like if
Yeah.
they woke up that would make a really beautiful thing to say to anybody that is a songwriter or whatever, is allow yourself to access that in the morning, and then that would make you better going into the
Yes.
afternoon. That is really interesting.
Well, and here's the concept of putting yourself in a box. A lot of creative people are worried about that. If you think about it from a brain science perspective, what you're actually doing is you're telling your prefrontal cortex, don't worry, I'm going to disengage you for a little bit, but I'm coming back online in
Mhm.
2 hours or whatever.
Are
So
you sure?
I'll have
Are you
writers,
sure?
I'll have writers set a timer for themselves,
Mhm.
because what it does is it gives your prefrontal cortex permission to go like, okay, I'll check out, but
No
only for 2
kidding.
hours. It just gives you the sense of control that we want over our environment. Your brain, its job is to keep you safe. So that's what it's trying to do. And if you tell your brain, like, listen, I'm going offline, but just for a couple of hours, and I promise I'm coming back, and you're not going to miss any meetings, we're going to be everywhere on time, and your rent's going to be paid, then your brain is more likely to let you wander down that trail than it would be if you're like, I'm taking psychedelic drugs and I have no idea if I'm ever coming back,
Yeah.
That's,
Well, how do you, so then when you're writing a book, when you're focusing on some things, if it's not a blog post, if it's an actual, you're obviously, your box is getting a little bit smaller because you're like, okay, I have to finish this chapter. And I know musicians go through that. It's like they're writing a record and they're trying to finish something and it's like, I got one more song to get done, and then they hit this block. Or it could be like, my favorite story is the band Lifehouse with Hanging by a Moment. Like they needed one more song, and he went into the other room and wrote that in an hour, and it like set their whole career off.
Totally.
So it can go both directions, but how do you, when you have the deadline, when you have that's like the box is closing, it's like not even set, how do you access the right part of your brain to be in that place? Or do you ever let
I think
yourself
it's
get
the
there?
hardest time to do that because if you think about being on a deadline, what part of your brain is concerned about a deadline? Your limbic system
Somebody else's brain is.
could give two shits about a deadline. Your limbic system's like, deadline? What's there even? There's no time. Time's not even a thing. It's
Yeah.
just it's a cultural construct that we're all living. That's like your limbic system, you know? Your prefrontal cortex is the one that's like, the publisher paid me this money and they told me that I have to turn this in by June 12th. And if I don't turn it in by June 12th, everybody's going to be mad at me. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge that we all face as creative people that also it overlaps with this concept of, you know, I hear creative people all the time talk about how lucky I am that I get to do my creative work and get paid for it. And I'm like, there is a sense at which the minute you get paid for your creative work, it stops being your creative work.
Yeah, I read that blog.
So we're always walking this tightrope of like, yes, it's fantastic. I count my blessings every day that I get to do this work and that I make a great living doing it. And also, you know, we have to find a way to keep giving, to keep coming back to our authentic self, which the only way to do that is to disconnect ourselves from what people are looking for from us, what they want from us, what they need from us, what they're paying us for, from this being sort of any kind of equal exchange. There's commerce and then there's art. And there is some overlap. Like you see books, for example, that are really beautiful pieces of art that have done very well in the industry. And same with music. But then there's a lot of bullshit that sells really well. And there's a lot of beautiful art that will never sell more than a few hundred copies. 95% of books never sell more than 100 copies.
Wow.
So there's a lot of beautiful art out there in the world that doesn't ever get the attention it really deserves. But that doesn't, I think the thing to remember is it doesn't devalue the work itself. And I, you know, I'm a firm believer that your work, the value of your work is not defined by the number of people who resonate with it, but by the depth of transformation it inspires. So if you write a song that inspires 5 people to totally change the direction of their life for the better, then isn't that better than writing some bullshit song that gets played on the radio a bunch but nobody cares?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody. Do you know what I mean?
We just had that conversation the other day. Yeah, Dustin flew out to a house party and there were 5 people there and he just left a gig of like 10,000 people and one girl started crying in front of him. He's like, that's it. That's what I want.
Yeah.
I don't want this. I want that.
Yeah.
Can I play devil's advocate to that though?
Of course.
Because if I were to look at my career arc and what I've done is I understand what you're saying, where you're getting paid X amount of dollars to perform a skill or bring something to the table that is. But can it be? I might be a different situation, but there's 2 things that for me that come out of that. I would always joke that if I could get paid to learn something, that's the perfect situation.
Yeah.
So, like, when you're a musician, if they say, "Oh, do you know how to run Pro Tools?" You're like, "Yep."
Yes.
And then for 2 days, you're like sitting there and you're figuring it out, you know, because you never say no. But now you're getting paid to learn a tool. Mm-hmm. And here's my devil's advocate thing to that is, yes, you can like if you're a painter and you get paid to paint a portrait of somebody, you're learning about paints, you're learning about strokes, you're building your toolbox to allow yourself to then come back to what matters to you to create that art. So are you saying that you don't see validity at all in being paid to do your thing?
No, not at all. And that's what it's. I think of it like a Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That on this side on the left side you have art, and on the right side you have commerce, and there's an overlap of the 2. But so like your painting example.
Yep.
It's different if, let's say, a friend commissions you and says, "I'm going to pay you $10,000. I want you to paint something for me that just makes you so happy." And that's the only context I'm going to give you. You can paint whatever makes you happy. That's one thing. But
I'd still say you're thinking about that person's how they're going to
well,
perceive
of course,
it,
but
sure.
But how much more are you thinking about it when they say, "Listen, I'm going to pay you $10,000, and because I'm paying you a lot of money, I really want you to only use the color red, and I don't want the painting to be any bigger than 10 by 10, and I really hate it when painters use acrylic paints. So if you could find a different kind of paint to use, that'd be great." And then do you know what I'm saying? Like it really quickly gets to this place where it's like, now we're having an exchange of value, and because you're paying me a lot of money, now who has the power in the situation? This is no longer an exchange of like, the vision that I've been given as the artist. And I don't want to sound too hippy-dippy about it, because I think that there's a balance. There is a center. There's a meeting
there's different
point
degrees to
in
it.
the middle.
I mean, you gave an extreme on one side and an extreme on the other.
Totally.
And I think the older we get and the more we get established in our field or in what we do, the more we're getting towards the place of, hey, here's $10,000, paint what your heart tells you to paint. Because I would say that, I mean, you working for the Nashville scene, writing an article about something comparatively to going out and working with these creative writers, like your heart is getting fulfilled in a certain way.
Yeah.
And that if we look at equal pay, you're still coming out on top in that situation. I mean, what is the ultimate for you? What would be the ultimate place for you to be in? Do you think that exists? Because I think that's what everybody chases. I just want to wake up every day and do my art. Do you think that that's good, or do you think that there should always be that kind of yin and yang balance of commerce versus...
Yeah, I think if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, I just want to wake up every day and do my art. Mm-hmm. I do think, here's what I think is great, that being an author in 2018 and being a musician is not much different, although the music industry is about 10 years ahead.
Well, I definitely wanted to talk about this with you for sure. Yeah.
You have to be a business person.
Yeah.
I have no business background. I have no business being a business owner. I know nothing about business other than what I have just learned on the fly, building the plane as it takes off on the runway, reading books, talking to people, listening to podcasts, figuring this out, because I have to figure it out, because if I don't figure out, I can't pay my employee and pay for my office space and cover my overhead and pay myself and pay my bills and all that stuff. So
and if you embrace that, there's a beauty in that too.
Totally.
Because now you can access millions of people you never could access before. Yeah.
And it is making me better at my art to think about how is this also a business. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the yin and the yang to your point of, I just want to do my art. I don't want to have to answer to anyone. It's like at the end of the day, when I work with writers, I have them think about the one reader that they would want to read this book, because I think if writing is a relationship, you do have to think about the person who's on the other side of it. Every good relationship is about me and you. So it's me paying attention to me and me paying attention to you. It's not one or the other. A relationship where I pay only attention to you becomes a toxic relationship really fast, and vice versa. A relationship where I pay only attention to me becomes toxic really fast. And I think our art can become toxic when it's all about us. So, but I also think it can become toxic when all we're thinking about is how do I hit the New York Times list? Yeah. Because I could talk for an hour about the absurdity of that. And at the same time, I would love to hit the New York Times list. Yeah. Who wouldn't, And same thing with music. It's like if all you're thinking about is how can I get this song on radio, you're not going to write the best song you know how to write. But if you're writing a song that you happen to really love but doesn't really resonate with the audience, I also think you're missing out on the depth of creativity that you have to offer the world. So I have loved that what it means to be an author in 2018 has forced me in this position where I've had to do things I wouldn't have otherwise done, because I wouldn't have otherwise wanted to think about, like, how do I manage my accounting, and when do I hire someone, and how do I grow revenue, and how do I make this scalable, and I would never have cared about that kind of stuff.
I love that. I've never thought of it that way. I think that would be the perfect balance, because you're investing in the business side of it, but it is leading to your art. Mm-hmm. You're not investing in somebody else's vision, you're investing in your own vision. Yeah. And however you choose, you have X amount of dollars and you're looking at options about where to invest it to further reach people, but you're reaching people with something that is you and that you believe in. Yep. I think that's it. That might be it. That might be the perfect spot.
Answered all the world's problems.
Yes. That's perfect. Cool. Well, do you want to... so how do people get your book?
My website.
Your website,
AllisonFallon.com. Yeah, and then you can follow me on Instagram at Allie Fallon. Allie with a Y.
Allie Fallon. And Allison, and that's with 2 L's, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
So fun.
Watch this heavy heart of mine turn this water into wine. Light your match and let it glow, so I know my way home. One more game of tic-tac-toe. You be X and I'll be you. Fall in love like dominoes, then I'll come back home. If I can't find you, go get lost in the simple things. Might I remind you, chase your tail and dream those dreams. One more glance to set me free. Forget right past what's in front of me. I'll be fine, they tell me so, 'cause I know my way home.